Okay, good afternoon. Thanks you all for coming. My name is Oliver. I'm a lead PM manager in Microsoft. My team is working on Office extensibility. We're providing APIs and services to developers who want to extend their applications using Office services, Office APIs, and we also enable developers to extend Office by adding functionality to Office and adding add-ins. And my colleague here, Holger, he's from SAP, and our teams have been working together on integrating SAP data and services into Office, but also integrating Office services into SAP applications. So today we're going to talk about the SAP Gateway for Microsoft and also look at some examples of add-ins that are using the gateway, how you can use the data, how you can interact with the data, and how you can develop across platforms add-ins or applications for Office that are using services and data from data sources like SAP. So we want to start with a short overview of the gateway, SAP Gateway for Microsoft. What are the functionalities? What are the features that it offers? How does it work, really? And next, we want to look at Office development, Office add-in development. I think you might have seen a couple of sessions yesterday and today in the morning. And then we want to look at one add-in that we co-developed, SAP and Microsoft. And it's an add-in for Excel, and it allows users to basically look at data and also update data that's coming from SAP through OData in Excel. So they can just open the data source, they can look at the data, they can format it in Excel, do reporting, and also update data just like you would do with any other data source in Excel. Okay, so with this, I hand it over to Holger, and he's going to show us the gateway for Microsoft.
Great, thank you, Oliver. Yeah, like Oliver said, my name is Holger Bruchelt. I'm a product manager at SAP. I'm working for this product, SAP Gateway for Microsoft, but also in general, I'm very much involved in lots of Microsoft-related discussions that we have together with Microsoft. And I'm happy that I can co-present today with Oliver our product, SAP Gateway for Microsoft, and show you some of these examples that we developed together. I mean, Oliver mentioned the Excel scenario. Before that, actually, I want to show you some scenarios of how we can integrate data into SharePoint Online, how we get the data into Outlook and some other scenarios. But before we go there, let me quickly recap why we are working so closely together. Why is there this great partnership between SAP and Microsoft? So actually, over the last 20 years, we've been working very, very closely together. This started by first porting our SAP servers on the Microsoft platform, then making available the user front end, our UI, available on Windows clients and so on. And then we work together on lots of different topics, on SQL Server, on a whole range of different applications. And the reason, or one of the reasons why we're really doing that, is obviously that our joint customer base is there's a huge overlap. So a lot of SAP customers are using Microsoft technologies. A lot of customers are using either on the server side, SQL Server or Windows Server. A lot of customers are obviously using Windows as a desktop operating system. So there are really a lot of areas where it simply makes sense from a customer perspective that SAP and Microsoft are working together. So what we did actually in the beginning of last year, we really sat together again, both Microsoft and SAP, and we tried what are the areas, or we tried to identify the areas where SAP and Microsoft can really work very closely together. I mean, obviously there are areas where there is competition, but there's also a lot of areas where it simply makes sense to work together. And we identified 4 different main areas where we said let's jointly work on that. Let's really jointly help our customers get the best out of their SAP and Microsoft environments. And these 4 pillars are, first of all, the platform and infrastructure. So I already talked about Windows Server, making sure that SAP is running on Windows, that we do support SQL Server. And for example, just one example that really shows how SAP and Microsoft are working very well together there. We have a bunch of Microsoft developers really sitting in our headquarters in Walldorf, working together with us, with SAP's developers on this product. And similarly, we have SAP developers sitting in Redmond, working really jointly and making sure that these products work very well together. And the next one is around mobility and industry solutions. So you probably, or you might know about our work managers. We have lots of different SAP mobile solutions that run also on mobile devices. We have our SAP mobile platform where we do support via SDKs and other service-specific components, mobile applications running on Microsoft devices, always obviously connecting to the SAP system and making sure that the SAP data and the processes are really available in these mobile devices. So there's also a lot of things going on in this area. Then in the cloud, obviously with Microsoft Azure, we see a lot of customers using Azure. And what we did is we certified SAP applications that they can run on the Azure platform. So you can go to, for example, our so-called cloud appliance libraries, and with a few clicks you can deploy SAP applications on Azure and can immediately use them either for testing or also for productive purposes. And finally, and that's the topic that we want to talk about today, the interoperability. We obviously see a lot of customers using Office tools, Office on-prem, but also more and more Office 365. And obviously, we want to help customers to get their SAP data and SAP processes in these Office tools. And that's really something where we want to spend today's sessions on. So the product that we have there, the SAP Gateway for Microsoft, really tries to make sure that we can get the business critical data that is in the SAP system to the end users, that they do not have to maybe learn SAP specific transactions or tools or UIs, but they can stay in their familiar environment in Outlook, in SharePoint, in Excel, and from there interact with SAP data. Maybe don't even knowing that they are accessing SAP data. They should just use their familiar tools, their familiar environment, and then interact with SAP data. Obviously, since we are now working with business critical data, certain things like security, single sign-on, supportability, auditing, monitoring, all these things have to be in place. You don't want an anonymous user accessing and changing your data on the SAP side. So that's exactly what this SAP Gateway for Microsoft is doing, ensuring that we have an enterprise-ready integration of SAP data in the Microsoft world. So for those of you who are familiar with SAP, you might ask, well, how does this fit in the overall SAP strategy? And actually, if we look at the SAP strategy, okay, the clicker is not working, okay. Then you can see that you might have seen this slide if you're following the SAP roadmap. We have this 3-pillar strategy that we are going to build, or we are building new user interfaces, and we are renewing existing user interfaces, and we want to enable customers and partners to build new interfaces on existing technologies. And with Gateway for Microsoft, we are actually doing or addressing all 3 pillars. So we are really enabling customers to build completely new scenarios. We're providing you with tools that help you build your own scenarios. And we even provide you with templates to really also make this integration happen. One thing that is really important there is the SAP Fiori user experience. That is really this guiding principle at SAP right now, where we're really trying to build delightful user experiences. And the key technology or the key architecture component of this SAP Fiori is OData. And Oliver will talk about OData later on in more detail, because that's the very same thing that we are also using with Gateway for Microsoft. And that actually offers some very unique capabilities because if we look at the Fiori applications, we have SAPs delivering, in the meantime, over 500 of these applications. They are using HTML5, JavaScript, they're using OData services, and they simply run beautiful in the browser. Now, what you can do with Gateway for Microsoft, for example, is really take these scenarios as a starting point, maybe just take the OData services and then get this information into your Office clients. And that's really something where we see a lot of really cool scenarios popping up where all of a sudden, and that's something that I want to show you later on, where all of a sudden where you have the Fiori application that allows you to approve a workflow or something like that, that you can take this application as a starting point, and you can very easily get this information, for example, in your Outlook, so that your employees, that your users can simply stay within Outlook and then work with workflows, for example, coming from the SAP side. So having said that, what I would like to do now is quickly show you how this scenario can look like. And I want to start with a quick view of this SAP Fiori. So here you can see this new UI, very much or similar like what you know with Windows 8, these tiles. In this case, they are all HTML5. They're responsive. They have this responsive design. So if I resize the window, the tiles rearrange and stuff like that. So it's very easy to use. And I really wanted to show you that because now I'm switching back to the old UI that probably most of you still know. So this is our typical SAP GUI, the user interface. And in the scenario that I want to show you now is I'm logging in here in the SAP system. Okay, maybe that timed out. Let me just try to do it again. So I'm logging in here in the SAP system. And for those of you who know SAP, there's these shortcuts, the transactions, and I'll just take a look at one of the tables. So this is a table that surfaces or that contains SAP data. So for example, here we have data for cars that are stored in my SAP system. And obviously, in this scenario, you first of all need to know your SAP username. You need to know the transaction. And then maybe the UI is probably also not the very best. So what we want to do is we want to take this content and really make it beautiful, really make it available to everyone. And that's where we have, with Gateway for Microsoft, we can expose this kind of information and consume this data in SharePoint, or in this scenario specifically in SharePoint Online. So what we have developed here is a so-called seller dashboard. So the idea or the scenario right now is that I'm a seller, a car salesman. I have my cars, and obviously the inventory is all stored in the SAP system. And now I'm accessing the data. So the data is really coming live from this SAP backend system. So all these cars in my inventory, we're now surfacing here in SharePoint. It should come up a little faster, but the idea is, or one very important thing is we're not duplicating the data. So the single source of truth is still our SAP system. So we're really making an online call, which also from a potential security or really from a data quality point of view, we're not duplicating the data. We are really always accessing the data on the SAP side. And now I have the data that I just saw here in the SAP screen. I have it now in a beautiful user interface in SharePoint. I can work I can add a new car, for example. And since we have single sign-on capability, I logged on. You didn't saw that, but I logged on with my Microsoft user. I can enter now here a car information. I could upload a picture or whatever. And then if I click on Save, this information would be saved back into my SAP system with my user context. So an auditor would clearly see in the SAP system who did add some information there. Or I can take a look at one of these cars. I can get a little more information. And very similarly, I can just click on Edit. I can modify some information directly here from SharePoint. And the beautiful thing, I, as the sales guy of these cars, I don't even have to know that I'm working with SAP data. I'm really staying in my SharePoint environment. Now let's assume I got some new cars delivered. and I really want my manager to check out these cars. So usually what I would do is I would send him an email. So let's switch to Outlook. And in this case, I'm not switching to my Outlook, my rich client Outlook, but I'm switching to Outlook online, Outlook in the browser, basically. So in the past, what I would do is I would click on New. I would send an email to my manager, so I'll send it to Truman, but I'll also send it to myself and tell him, check out these cars. And now I have to tell him which cars. So what I would usually do is I would go back to the SAP system, I would copy and paste the information and then send this email to him. Now, with the integration of SAP data into SharePoint Online via Gateway for Microsoft, what I can now also do is I can simply click here on this Apps button, and then I can click on this Contoso Motors Compose Mail application. And now we're doing the very same thing that I just did in SharePoint. In SharePoint, we connected to the SAP system via a single sign-on, and now I'm connecting from Outlook to the SAP system. So I'm staying within my environment. I'm staying within Outlook. And now I can simply say, well, check out this car, check out that car, and maybe check out this car. And the other beautiful thing here is I'm just adding the identifier. So I'm not, again, duplicating the data in my Outlook, which might get outdated at some point in time, but I'm just sending the stock number, which also means that if someone would intercept this email, we have customers that are looking from an insurance company, for example, at this specific scenario, and there obviously you don't want to send, or you probably not want to send sensitive information via email. So what they're doing is they're just sending the identifier of your contract, for example, via email. So even if someone would detect this email or intercept this email, who cares? It's just the identifier. The important thing now is I'm switching to the Outlook of my manager. So this is my manager Truman here. He got obviously this email with all these identifiers, and you can see that it's not a plain email, but you have these dotted lines, which means if I click now on one of these stock items, then what is happening again, we are using Gateway for Microsoft to connect to the SAP system. We are really retrieving the latest up-to-date information from SAP, and we are displaying this information within Outlook so that the manager can see all the information. So again, the manager doesn't need to know that he's working with SAP. He sees the latest information directly from the SAP system. Okay, so that was the first demo that I want to cover. So I'll hand it over back to Oliver.
Okay, thank you. So we've seen some very interesting Office add-ins. We've seen one that allowed you to compose emails. So you can browse the cars and compose your email based on data that's shown in Outlook, whether it's online or in the rich client. And then another one which allows you to get more information while you're reading email. But what does it actually take to develop these add-ins, and what are they really? Right? So they are things that extend functionality of Office, right? And they used to be called apps, but we felt that the name add-in is more consistent with what they are doing, right? Because they just add in functionality to the existing experience. They live in Office, right? They can live in Outlook, in Excel, Access, anywhere. And they interact with the content, right? Whether it's a document, an email, through very rich JavaScript APIs, right? So you can use JavaScript to just interact with the document, with the workbook, with an email, right? So for the developer, it's very easy to develop these rich experiences. They run on the rich client in Office 2013. They run, as Holger has shown, in the browser, so you can use Office Online and just run the add-ins. And as a developer, you don't have to develop multiple versions. You develop it once, and it runs anywhere. And we're also adding more and more support for mobile devices. And we're going to see a demo later. So what you need as a developer, basically you create a web page which contains the UI, right? It's HTML5 probably, and some JavaScript for the logic and for the interaction with the document, with the email, with the workbook. And secondly, you need a manifest, right? And the manifest just tells Office what this add-in is about, right? It gives a name, description, it points to the location of the web page, and provides information about the security context and also the type of add-in that you want to add, like a task pane or in content. So the web page can really be anywhere, right? You can host it on your server on-prem, you can have something hosted in Azure. You can really use any web page that the user can point to. Right? And then for the manifest, it should be published either to the public store, so anybody can get this add-in from the store. It could also be a network share in your corporation, or just something like an internal SharePoint list. Right? So you can have a list, you can have a network share, or you can actually publish the app and even sell it on the store. So the task pane, that's the one we saw when Holger was composing the email. Right? So typically you had release state on the right of your application. It could also be on the left if you're using a different version. And then you provide the UI and the JavaScript for the application logic. Like in this case, it's a translation add-in, right? And that's very common. You have things like dictionaries, translators. These are very common types of add-ins for Word or Outlook. Okay. Another one is what we call in-content, right? And that's the one we saw with reading the email. So you get some content and you want additional information. So you can actually provide these add-ins that are related to certain types of content. Like in this case, they're providing this heat map based on a map. This is one example of a manifest file. That's the one that we developed together with SAP for Excel. You can see it's very, very basic information. The most important one is maybe the ID, the identifier of the add-in, right? And then things like the provider, the locale, but also the URL of the HTML5 code that you want to use. And some capabilities, like in this case, we want to interact with the workbook. This shows you the different platforms we support and the different types of add-ins we offer for different platforms. So just a few highlights. We do have Outlook for Mac, right? So you can have mail apps on Mac and online and on the rich client. Excel, we support both content and task pane apps. For Word, we're still working on the content integration. Any questions so far? Yes?
For the program you have, but for the gateway, how do you do the translation or make the connection from AD to SAP ID? How that connection is?
Okay, so the question is, how do we basically map the AD identifier to SAP? Yes.
Mm-hmm. So there are different ways how this can be accomplished. I mean, obviously, this is one of the most critical things. If you have a unique identifier across your company already, so that the usernames are the same on your Microsoft installation and on the SAP side, then what we have with this Gateway for Microsoft piece is a functionality that basically just rips off the domain name on the Microsoft side and uses then this identifier for single sign-on to create a token and everything so that you have the single sign-on to the SAP system. Now, if the usernames are different, then you need to have some mapping functionality. I mean, there's no other way around. You somehow have to tell the system that my user Holger on the AD is the user Bruchelt in the SAP system, for example. So you need to have this information somewhere. What we see with a lot of customers is that they use an extension attribute in the AD where they say, look, this is the SAP name. So then in the AD, you would have the information, obviously, this is my SAP, this is my AD username. That's the SAP, the SAML account name or something like that. And then you have an additional attribute, which is the SAP username. And then what we can do is we can take this information and populate a user mapping table on the SAP side that makes sure that if a ticket comes in with a Microsoft ID, so with my user Holger, that it looks up in the mapping table on the SAP side that this user is mapped to the user Bruchelt on the SAP side, and then the authentication can continue. But it's somewhere you need to have the information that this user is in AD is this user in the SAP system. No, it is, but somewhere you have to maintain this, because obviously the gateway cannot guess that my last name is this. I mean, if there's a logic behind this, then you could do it. If, for example, the first name is your AD user and the last name is always your SAP user, then you can implement this logic that this user mapping table is automatically populated. But somewhere you need to have this information that this is your Microsoft username and this is my SAP username. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of systems that we have these expense reports and
Mm-hmm.
all performance, success factors and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
This gateway interacts with all these systems, or is it specific to?
Mm-hmm. So the question is if this gateway interacts with all SAP systems, or if it's specific to some. Actually, this so just from a terminology point of view, there's an SAP gateway, which is the server side on which resides on the SAP side, and then there's this SAP gateway for Microsoft, which is very specific for the Microsoft integration, which runs on the Microsoft side. Now, in order to expose the OData services, you need this SAP gateway on the SAP side, and this component actually can connect to a multitude of backend systems. So it can be your ECC system, it could be your BW system, it could be HANA, it could be a lot of different systems. And we have a tool called the Service Builder, which allows you to create any OData service. So it's a nice wizard-driven tool. You can still go into the development and do everything simply by coding, but from this gateway you can easily expose all the OData services that you need. Yes. So in the case of Office 365, or the question was what's this gateway for Microsoft on the Microsoft side. In the case of Office 365, it's more or less just a worker role that we deploy on Azure, and this worker role takes care of the single sign-on, the connectivity to the SAP system, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So the question is payroll clusters and other. In theory, yes. I mean, I would always, since we're not duplicating the data, I would be a little cautious of how much information do you really want to push over the wire, more or less. So usually in these scenarios, it's a server to UI. So it's about visualizing some information. So you probably would not like to upload a lot of information and then do the calculation in SharePoint, let's say, for example. But what you probably would do is do the calculation on the SAP side and then just expose the results. But that's definitely something that you can do with Gateway, with the SAP Gateway on the SAP side, and then consume this information on the Microsoft side. For example. Exactly.
Yes. Oh.
Mm-hmm. So the SAP Gateway, the question is it a separate license? The SAP Gateway component is something that is included in your existing license. And that goes so far that in the latest releases of SAP, so with SAP NetWeaver 7.40, it's already included. You don't need to do anything with older releases. It's just an add-on that you install on your NetWeaver stack, and then it's there. So on the Microsoft side, the SAP Gateway for Microsoft, that is a product that you need to license separately.
That's from Microsoft?
That's from SAP. Yes.
Yes.
So I think there, yeah.
One question is, you mentioned Office 365. How about on-premise SharePoint?
Mm-hmm.
Will that plug in the same way? Or?
Mm-hmm. So the question is about on-premise. And SAP Gateway for Microsoft also works on-premise. Actually, Gateway for Microsoft contains of 3 main building blocks, I would say. One important building block is the Office 365 integration. We have one integration that focuses on basically the developer experience, also for Office 2010, where we integrate still via the COM add-ins and stuff like that. And actually, as a third component, we have an end-user-ready Excel add-in that allows you to connect from Excel 2010, for example, to your SAP systems. I would actually suggest we take 2 more
Okay, so
questions,
maybe-
and then
yes,
after
and then
the session, we can definitely have much more follow-up questions, I would say.
Imagine the following scenario. The customer uses Exchange infrastructure instead of BizTalk server. And for Exchange infrastructure, you can place an OData connector. Is it possible to make OData services available for SAP via Exchange infrastructure and interact with these wall or these service components?
So the question is, is it possible to expose OData coming from Exchange to SAP? So it's basically the other way around, right? You want to...
No, it's not
Okay.
the other way around. A lot of customers have implemented Exchange infrastructure, and then it makes sense to expose OData service via these OData
I see.
connector.
Hmm.
Would it be possible to interact with this connector, or is it limited to SAP NetWeaver Gateway?
So I have to admit that I'm
Okay.
not too familiar with Exchange infrastructure.
So about the add-ins that we are developing, they can communicate with any OData endpoint, right? So there are no limitations, yes.
Great. Okay, then I would suggest we continue, but this does not mean that we don't answer questions, but
Yeah.
maybe we can just put them to the end of the session, and then we can have much more discussions.
So it's actually a nice segue into the next topic, OData. So we've seen some interesting add-ins already using SAP data, but how do we communicate with SAP? And the answer is we're using OData. And OData is a data access protocol. And what's really interesting about OData is it supports REST. So it's very easy to get data just by using URLs. And it's very, very good at supporting metadata. So you can easily query for metadata, things like data structure, data types, but also relationships. You can easily figure out what are the relationships between entities in a data set, what are the data types, and what is the structure of the data. It's a standard. It's now standardized by Oasis, version number 4, and it's used by companies like SAP, but as you said, there are many other OData providers that can also interact with our add-ins. It supports CRUD, so you can create, read, update, and delete, and it maps to HTTP, so you can easily you can post new entities, you can update existing entities, and you can also patch and delete them. Okay. So to show how everything comes together, Holger's going to show a nice workflow add-in that we did for Outlook.
Mm-hmm. So again, let me quickly start with the Fiori screen. So in Fiori, we have a tile, for example, that is for the approval of purchase orders. So you could go in here, you could see the purchase order or something like that, and then you could approve it from this user interface, which is very nice, and we have lots of customers using that. But what we also hear from a lot of customers is, well, I would like to have this in Outlook. So can I also work with this from Outlook? And what we can do here is, and that's exactly what I meant in the beginning, we can basically just say, well, we have the functionality on the SAP side, so we have the OData service because of this SAP Fiori scenario. But what we want to do is we want to remove the Fiori UI layer, basically, and make that available in Outlook. So what we have done is we created, again, one of these applications, an application for Outlook, similar to the Contoso Motors scenario that I showed you before. But this time, you get out of the box this a notification email from the SAP system. So basically, for example, this is all standard SAP. When there is a new workflow, you can get a notification email in your inbox, and you would get this an email like this here. Dear owner, there's a new item, and I could click on the link, obviously. Then this Fiori UI would open up, and I could approve the workflow from there. But what we can do now is, and this is really very much not intrusive, it's just an additional functionality that we can now offer our end users. We can detect via this app model that this is probably a workflow coming from the SAP system. So let me just go to another email again here. This is a simple email. There's no application. Or if I go to this, this email that we just sent before, then I can also see this interaction here. Only in this workflow email, we can see that there is an app called SAP Approvals. So if I click on this application, what we're now doing is we're retrieving this identifier, this workflow identifier. We're making a call, again, via Gateway for Microsoft to the SAP system, looking up the specific details of this workflow, rendering a new user interface, pulling in additional information like this is a vacation, it's 7 days from when till when, and have this user experience now again directly within Outlook. So I don't have to leave my Outlook. I have all the relevant information in here. I can see all the needed information is there, and now all that I need to do is click on Approve, and I'll say fine with me, and I click on Approve again, and the workflow is approved in the SAP system. Now the really powerful thing is that this application, it runs here in the browser, so it really runs everywhere where I can access Outlook Web Access. It also obviously runs, and that's really the interesting thing here. The very same application also runs in my Outlook Rich client. So this is now my Outlook 2013. I have here this very same workflow, obviously. I have the same user experience. I click on this SAP approval. And okay, obviously the workflow is already approved because I just approved it in my Outlook Web Access. So again, coming back to this single source of truth, the SAP system, that's where the workflow relies. And no matter what user interface I'm using, whether I'm using Fiori, whether I'm using Outlook in the browser, whether I'm using Outlook here, the rich client experience, it always connects to the same data source, and it's really then up to the user to use the user experience, the user interface that he likes to use. We switch back now.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you. So when we talk to customers, one very common request or requirement is really they would like to work with the data coming from a system like SAP in Excel, right? Because a lot of information workers, they're very familiar with Excel, and they want to live in the same system. Just like in Outlook, they don't want to switch to another system just to approve something. They want to work with the data in Excel. Ideally, they would like to use all the functionality to be able to sort and filter and do nice reporting, but also they would like to update the data in Excel. They don't want to switch back to SAP and do updates and then go back to Excel to look at the data again. So ideally, everything should live in Excel. Another common requirement is really they would like to do this on multiple platforms, right? They have maybe iPads, maybe even phones, a rich client, a browser, and they want to have the same experience everywhere. And that's something that the add-ins for Office can really support, right? You write this add-in, and we saw you can run it in a browser, you can run it in Outlook, in Excel, in Word, almost anywhere. Okay. So we came up with this idea to create this add-in specifically for the old data coming from SAP through the gateway, and to integrate this into Excel. And the very high-level architecture is this, right? We got the OData endpoint coming from the gateway, and that's hosted in Azure. We added some helper functions just to make it easy to read and write the data, and also to do the authentication and to provide the web UI to the add-in. And then finally, some helper functions in JavaScript, right? So JavaScript to interact with the workbook, and also to talk to the helper functions in Azure and to update the data, to read the data, and also do things like formatting the colors and the appearance of the data. So not only can you see the data, but you can actually get additional context just by looking at color and format. So this is just an overview of the helper functions we implemented for the gateway, just to make it easy to get the metadata, get the tables, and look at the properties and headers, and also look at the information about the columns that we're getting. And like we said earlier, this works for any OData source, right? You can you can do this and connect to other OData sources and have a very similar experience in Excel. On the client, we had to write some helper functions just to make it easier to interact with the workbook. Right? So we can get data, we can update data in SAP coming from Excel. We can provide additional context by showing colors. So, for example, we're showing data in green if it's updated in Excel, and we're showing it in blue if it's coming from SAP. Right? So it gives you a nice visual cue where the data is coming from. Then we have things like navigation and authentication. And finally, error handling if anything goes wrong, if the validation doesn't work, right? We expose the error coming from SAP back in the client, and then the user can see what is happening, really. Okay, and now we can actually show the latest version of this add-in.
So let me start, this time in the rich client experience. So this is Excel 2013, and one of the very simple benefits of this apps for Office model is that I don't have to roll it out. So usually in the past when we were looking at Office 2010 or 2007 or something like that, there was always this issue of rolling out all these add-ins to the users, and then there was something didn't work and so on. So it can be a hassle. Now with this new apps model, what I can do is I can simply click on Insert. Then there's the My Applications, and very much like what Oliver said before, there can be a company store. And in this scenario, an application called SAP integration is assigned to me in this company store. So it shows up here, and I can simply click on Insert, and we get this task pane that Oliver also mentioned before. And in this specific task pane, I have a Contour motor collection. So coming back to the first demo that we did, where we had the SAP data in SharePoint, we had the SAP data in Outlook. Now, if I want to do mass updates operations, I probably do not want to do this in SharePoint and certainly not in Outlook. But what I would probably want to do is really have this information in Excel. And now I can connect to the very same OData service. I can use, again, the very same single sign-on mechanisms. So there's nothing that I need to change on the SAP side. I'm just having now another user interface that I give my users so that in this scenario they can connect to the SAP data from Excel. So you can see it's a live demo, and I'm not sure. I hope this click works. So it was using, let me just wait for a few more seconds. Oh, here we go. So now I have the information. So all this car information that I saw before in SharePoint, that I saw before in Outlook, I have now this information in my Excel rich client experience. And those of you who know Excel obviously know that consuming an OData service is not really something special. I mean, Excel has this functionality out of the box. What we have done here is really the functionality to not only read the information, but to also write back the information. So I can now simply change some of the information. So maybe here I'll change this contact name. Maybe I'll change the color here to blue. Maybe I'll update the year here or something like that. No matter what. This is pure Excel. So all of you know how to work with Excel. You can now work with SAP data from Excel. And then once I have done my changes, what I can simply do is I can click here on Compare and Share and Save. And what we'll do now is we'll compare the things that have changed in Excel compared to what has changed in the SAP system. Because obviously, someone else could have updated the very same information via SharePoint, or someone could have updated this via the SAP system, or someone else could have used this Excel add-in to update the data in the SAP system. So I guess most of you, since you know SAP, know that in parallel we have currently the Sapphire event in Orlando. And actually the colleagues there are using the very same scenario to also work with the data coming from the SAP system. So they are updating the data, we are updating the data. The single source of truth is the SAP system. And now we can really see that, for example, in this scenario, the contact name changed compared to what is in the SAP system, the color changed compared to what is in the SAP system, and the year changed compared to the value in the SAP system. I can have here a nice overview. What are the values? Maybe I want to keep something that is in the SAP system. Maybe it makes more sense that the color is green, or, well, let's keep it for blue right now. I can change the year again. So I can review all the settings, and then I can simply click on Update, and now we're changing the data in the SAP system. And again, the important thing is that from a monitoring, from an auditing point of view, this is done in my user context, which also would mean that if I don't have permissions in the SAP system, then I would not be allowed to do that. So we're not enabling all of a sudden all users to work with SAP data, even if they're not allowed to do that. On the contrary, the SAP system is the leading system. So all the authorization objects that you have in place, all the roles, all the profiles that you have maintained in your SAP system are still valid. We are just providing another user interface for the users. Now, this is something that is also possible with other with VSTO or COM add-ins. Now, let's do the next step and go to Excel Online. So I go here to Office 365, and I'll just start Excel Online. So the very same scenario. Now I'm working in a browser, Excel in a browser. So this could also run on any device. And very much like in the rich client experience, I just go to Insert. I have here this Apps for Office button. I can see here my organization. So the very same add-in is also available. And this could be really in an internet cafe somewhere else. I can run this in a browser. I select this application. I click on Insert. And then very much like in this rich client experience, I have now the functionality here in Excel. I select the data source. I click on Connect. And you can already see we are retrieving the information here from the SAP system and have this data now in the browser. So a really, really powerful, a really beautiful scenario that allows us to work with Excel on the rich client and also in the browser. So now we come to the highlight, and
Let's try this.
you don't see it here. Oh, maybe you see it in a second. So now let's do the next step. So, okay. So most of you know, I think there were some announcements that I don't know how many hundreds of millions Office applications were already downloaded on the App Store, and this is Excel. This is the native Excel application running on the iPad. So this is not Excel Online in the browser. This is really well, actually, it's a pre-release of the Excel on the iPad, but still, it shows where this whole thing is going, where the power of this Apps for Office model is really coming really to life, so that you build the application once, and then it runs on your rich client on the Windows. It runs in the browser, and it runs here in the iPad. And the user experience, the feel is very much like what I just showed you before. So there's in Insert, there's the add-ins, and I can see this SAP integration add-in. I click on it, and very much like what we saw in the rich client, in the browser experience, I have this task pane now. I can now just select the data source. I click on Connect, and I'm retrieving the information. That was fast. And have the information now on my iPad. And just think of it now. Of course, you can use your Surface or you can use the browser, but now you can also have this information on your iPad, and I don't know, potentially at some point on your Android devices and on all the mobile devices. And this is just Excel. Now, think of that this might come in Word, that this could come in PowerPoint, that this could come in Outlook, and then all of a sudden you really build the application once. You have the connectivity via Gateway for Microsoft to the SAP system, and then it's really up to you from where you want to consume SAP, or not only consume, but really interact with SAP data. So again, you can update the information here, you can make the changes, you can check what is working where, and then just click on Save and write back the information to your SAP system. So that is the iPad demo. Feel free to come by, and maybe you can also play around with this, because I think this is really, really cool addition to the integrations that we had so far.
Thank you, Holger. I think you've seen what's possible when you combine OData data feed like coming from SAP with the power of Office add-ins. Right? It enables a lot of scenarios, a lot of rich features, and it extends the experience running and working with data in Office. There are some resources. We have white papers on the gateway for Microsoft published. There's odata.org with information about OData, the different standards, and what you can and cannot do. And finally, there's a Dev Center for Office. And this provides lots of information about add-in development, about the APIs that are available, and also some very nice examples of add-ins that you can just start with to develop your own add-in experience. So with that, we can open it up for questions. Yes?
So if you get the SAP gateway from Microsoft, can you use that in a ASP.NET web application, or is it only for Office admin?
No.
So the question is, can you use this data in something like an ASP.NET page, or is it really just for Office add-ins? And the answer is you can use it anywhere, right? You can use it in SAP, and in fact we are, right? Because we're having this SAP.NET page, which is providing helper functions and the UI for the add-in, right? And you can just host your own SAP.NET page and don't do the add-in, right? So once you have the OData, you can really do anything you want. Yes?
What's the effort on the gateway? Is there development that you need to do to expose that data? Or is it done natively on the data in SAP? Do you, so for example, are you exposing functional modules, values, tables? What are you doing with that gateway?
So first of all, so the question is how do you get to these OData services on the SAP side? First of all, there are really hundreds of OData services available from SAP out of the box, which you can use immediately. Then there's a tooling story that allows you to, for example, modify and enhance existing OData services. So another thing that we really see a lot being used by customers, that they take an OData service as a starting point, and they add 3 more fields, they remove or hide 10 fields, and that's then the OData service that they're really looking at. And then finally, if there's nothing, then you have a beautiful tool that helps you create OData services. And this can be based on a BAPI, it can be based on a function module, it can be based off a lot of other different abstraction layers that are part of the SAP system already, or it can also be really from scratch. So that you're saying, well, I will develop my own SQL query or whatever and build an OData service out of that. So it's really a very, very powerful tool that we have there on the SAP side that helps you to either really do code-free development, so you can really say, I take this BAPI and I click next, 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 finish, and then I have the OData service. Maybe that's too high level for you, so maybe you want to use it on a data dictionary object and use that as a starting point to create your OData service. So there's really, I can show you maybe later, it's really a nice tool that allows you to create these OData services.
What are the prerequisites to install and deploy the gateway? That has SAP ERP?
So the question is, what are the prerequisites to install the gateway?
So basically, what you need is just an ABAP stack. So you need an ABAP system, and then there are certain prerequisites. So if you have an ABAP system based on 740, then you don't need to do anything. It's already there. Say again? No PI or something like that in the middle. You just expose the OData service, and that's it. Yeah.
I heard you say that you can install the SAP gateway from Microsoft on-premise. Did you say that earlier?
Well, so correct. So the question is, where do we install this gateway for Microsoft? If you want to integrate in Office 365, then you need to install it on Azure. So there's a worker role that you install it. Then for the on-premise scenario, in a lot of cases, we have the add-in that you just roll out, for example. So these VSDO or COM add-ins that are part of our development story of Gateway for Microsoft. And these you just install locally. You wouldn't install them on Azure.
And complete SAP gateway from Microsoft.
Correct. Exactly.
That must be in the cloud.
Correct.
And if you develop add-ins, you can host them internally, right? You can put them on a network share, and they would show up as shared add-ins, right? They wouldn't be in the store, but you can still use them on-prem. So you could enable the same scenarios.
So is that work the same for the SharePoint? The add-on?
Well, we don't have an explicit add-on right now that you install on the SharePoint on-premise, but you could use the developer story to create the required .NET components, for example, that would help you there in the integration with SharePoint.
So you could develop a SharePoint app, right, and host it in the same tenant as the gateway.
So right now, there are no services from SharePoint to consume or to integrate with SAP Gateway.
Well, I think it depends on, first of all, which SharePoint version you have, whether you're SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint 2013.
That one we go to upgrade next, but that one, if we have the 13, is that out of the box? What do we need in order to integrate with SAP Gateway?
So with SharePoint 2013, you can consume OData services. If you follow, again, this app model, which works with SharePoint 2013, and from there you could consume OData services directly. Regarding the whole single sign-on, there are different ways how to accomplish that, I would say.
But you could actually host the SharePoint app in the same tenant as the gateway, right?
So yeah, that's a requirement.
It's not a requirement, but it would make it easier. Yeah. Yes.
I saw you demo earlier for the workflow, and does that support the customer workflow as well, or is that so how about on-premise scenario? If you say you're going to approve into upload and workflow.
So the question is regarding the workflow. Again, the main requirement here is that we need the OData service. And Gateway, SAP Gateway, the on-premise piece basically, has some out-of-the-box workflow scenarios that you just need to configure. If, for whatever reason, they're not good enough, then you could develop your own specific workflow OData service. But usually what we see is there's a generic workflow called the task processing service, and you would consume this specific OData service. And then, if you're looking at the on-premise scenario, so Outlook on-premise, for example, you could follow the very same process as with the other on-premise scenario. So you would just connect from there. You don't need Office 365 or Azure. You would just connect from there to the OData service. You would develop the app, would host it internally on a SharePoint tenant or something like that, or maybe on a shared folder. And then you would have the ability to approve the workflows also in a pure on-premise scenario.
So, but the information on-premise scenario, when you pass back to SAP, say the SAP, the workflow lives in SAP side, right? In that case, if you do customization, well, that still pass and still can expose through OData.
Yeah, and this is all part of the OData. Actually, there's no difference in this scenario whether you're consuming this in the on-premise or in the Outlook Office 365 scenario, because you're just connecting to the same OData service. And in the one scenario, this OData service is hosted on Azure so that you can really access it easily from outside your company. In the other scenario, this OData service is simply hosted internally on the gateway server itself, and you connect from there directly. So there's no difference whatsoever on the SAP side. We're just exposing the OData service.
Yes.
Did you say that you can install the SAP Microsoft Gateway on the same tenant as your O365?
Yes. So you have.
Microsoft involved.
Well, you need an Azure tenant. That belongs to you.
It's not Office.
So O365 is on an Azure tenant. I don't know.
No, you have your Office 365, and then you have an Azure tenant on which you deploy Gateway for Microsoft as a worker role. You have to have an Azure tenant.
Why don't you just do it on-prem? I've written apps that are hosted locally. You have firewall, and they can still be pushed to O365.
The thing is the single sign-on piece. That's why we're doing this in Azure, because there we have the connectivity to the Azure Active Directory. So when you log on to Office 365, you authenticate against Azure Active Directory, and then we can take the token, the authentication token that you have there, to authenticate to our worker role on Azure. There we do a transformation of the token, which we then use to authenticate to the SAP on-premise system. So that's why we have this component on Azure. I'm not saying that there are other ways, but this is the way that we chose together with Microsoft to really have the single sign-on flow from Office 365 to your on-premise system. I'm sure there are certainly other ways as well, absolutely.
It doesn't have to be on Azure, it's just like Holger said, it's easier to do the authentication and the mapping.
But I'm already doing off with my on-prem app.
Yes.
I already have those trusts set up using Azure, which underlies SharePoint. It's the SharePoint tenant. I don't have to have a separate entity. I'll authenticate. Now, admittedly, I do pass these credentials through the app, and I actually use anonymous on the server.
Mm-hmm.
Then I do check the credentials in the app.
Okay. Again, I'm not saying there are no other ways.
I just want to go back to my map and say, I got to put my Azure.
Yeah. So for us, it was really important to have a true single sign-on from the Azure or from Office 365 to the backend system, so that there's no way there's a technical user or an anonymous user or something like that, because that always means a technical user always has to have more permissions than an individual user, obviously. And if you're really accessing business-critical data on the SAP system, then you probably don't want to do that, because you never know if someone hacks into your system and gets access to this technical user. But then all of a sudden, this hacker has access to, well, to all the data. So that's why we said, no, we really want to have a single sign-on. And if you're fine, if you don't need this kind of trust, this security, then that's perfectly fine. And again, I'm also not saying that there are not other ways. This is just, we had lots of discussions with Microsoft together, what is the best way to accomplish this single sign-on? And that's what we came up with. So I'm not saying maybe in 6 months we'll have an even better way or something like that. But as of now, as of today, this is our recommended way or recommended approach to really solve the whole single sign-on flow. But I'm not saying that your approach is not valid. Sure.
Yes.
What kind of control do you have over the worker role in Azure? Can you do like auto scale while it's sitting up there?
So the question is, what control do you have over the worker role in Azure?
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, basically it's up to you, right? I mean, you can deploy it in Azure, you can deploy it elsewhere, but you control what you want to do with this worker role. So full control.
I guess my question focuses more around, you have a single instance of the worker role, and it's, I guess, just one VM that you're sitting on, right? If it's just a basic whatever. But if you start hitting it, with multiple sources, you obviously want to scale that
Right.
out, right? And you'll be able to do that.
Yeah, you could scale it out. Yeah.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Okay. There's one in the back.
So to leverage this, do you have to have Azure Active Directory in your basic or premium services running to be able to do integration with Active Directory?
So the question is, do we need premium or basic of the
I think basic is
Active
enough.
Directory?
Because that's a cost that you have.
No, my understanding is that basic is enough. Yeah.
Yes.
So, question back to you. When you were doing this thing for a long time, you had this confidence, and now with this new methodology of doing the integrations, so do you have to think different way of exposing your data and come up with different applications, or you just look at your own concepts of confidence and say, how do I write it in this HTML5 and the data exposed to the Office 365 aspect or in content? So what is your thought process was going through?
So the question is, do we need new ways to expose data because we have this new application model?
My question
Yeah.
is that a lot of the things you have to start thinking new way, or that people who already have the format they can just look at them and try to replicate it in a new way? Or
Oh, okay.
what was the journey for you guys?
Well, I don't think you have to look at the data differently, right? And in many cases, customers do have the COM add-ins already built in, right? If you look at the data, we're using OData and then JSON because it's very easy to work with, especially in JavaScript. But we didn't, I wouldn't say we designed the data we are exposing just to support this app model, right? It happens to be OData, and it's something we can easily integrate, right? We can use JSON, we can use REST, and it's just something that's very, very modern and easy to integrate into an application using JavaScript. Right? But we certainly didn't implement OData just to support the app model. Yes. Oh, the add-ins, they work on 2013 and later.
The Office 10, you have to use the whole COM add-ins that
Yes.
you're talking about. The
What?
new model is moving forward now,
Right, and then they also work in the browser. So if you have Office Online, you can just, like we saw in the demo, you can just open it online in the browser and you can use the add-in. Yes?
Given the name SAP Gateway from Microsoft, is this strictly architected and built for Microsoft application, or can it be used by other means than by other business
Okay.
apps or
So the question is,
Tomcat or whatever?
yeah, because it's named SAP Gateway for Microsoft, is it really just for Microsoft technologies?
Exactly. So we have this SAP Gateway, which just exposes the OData service, and SAP Gateway is completely agnostic of the consumer. So it doesn't really care who is consuming this OData service. And SAP Gateway for Microsoft is explicitly built to make this agnostic exposure of the OData service very, very Microsoft specific, so that we solve the single sign-on things, that we integrate in the SAP Solution Manager from Microsoft and so on. So this is really Microsoft specific.
And it's serving OData, so you can filter on it, you can choose that one.
Yeah.
The other question is, going forward, where do we see SAP going to? Is it going to remain the way it is, or the future is it moving to a new UI?
Yeah, so the question is, where does the SAP GUI evolve? I would say it definitely will evolve. It will still be there because we have thousands of customers still using it, and there are lots of power users who are very happy with it. But we already see, for example, the NetWeaver Business Client that enriches the SAP GUI experience. We have sub-screen personas, which helps you to beautify the GUI. But then we will see more and more of these SAP Fiori-based applications. So with S/4HANA that we just released, it's all SAP Fiori basically. So we're really trying to rebuild the user experience and really have a much, much more beautiful user experience than what we have right now with the SAP GUI.
One more question. With regards to the OData is coming back to Microsoft Office applications. What kind of volume of data can you handle? We talk about hundreds of thousands of records. We talk about half a million.
So keep in mind, so the question is how many records can we handle? The idea of OData.
Or can you chunkify? Can you ask for?
Yes, definitely. So first of all, let me start with the idea of OData is really for visualization of data. So it's not meant to be as a protocol to transport millions of data records at once. That's where we have other technologies where we have, and I mean, OData is not a protocol from SAP. It's an open protocol. OData, the core idea of OData is to have a server to UI communication. And there you have to, does it make sense to have millions of records in a UI all of a sudden? So what you can definitely do is you can have paging. So give me the first 100 records, and then give me the next 100 records, and the next, or give me the first 1,000 records if it makes sense. But you have to keep in mind that it's really server to UI, and you probably don't want to push millions of records at once via the OData protocol.
So another thing you can do, you can just download the headers and then do asynchronous loading of the data. That's another way to deal with large data sets.
Yeah.
And paging, of course. Oh.
Yeah, question. What about going the other way? What about if you actually want to access data within SharePoint from within SAP?
So that's a very good question. What about the other way around? So accessing data from SharePoint, for example, from
And documents as well as content data. I'm an SAP transaction record. I'm on a purchase requisition, and I want to be able to take a look at documents associated with that.
Mhm.
Have that linked.
So SAP Gateway for Microsoft currently really focuses only on the integration of SAP data into the Microsoft UI. For the other way around, there are either already some existing technologies available, or we're currently brainstorming around that. Let's put it like this.
Other being third-party products, you're saying?
Well, either other third-party products, or there are also archive link, for example. If you look at document-specific, there is a protocol that helps you to integrate documents. But there are also some other mechanisms how you could do this. I mean, you could consume OData services, SharePoint OData services in your SAP system via custom development maybe, or via some scripts that we have. So there are ways. But there's certainly room for improvement, I would say. Yeah.
You mentioned that the SAP Gateway for Microsoft incurs a separate licensing cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's on top of the basic licensing that they already pay for. And then in terms of users, so every user that's going to be using it also has an SAP license required, correct?
Correct, yeah. Correct, but there are special licenses for this. So let's say you have 10 users already fully licensed with SAP, and now you want to use this technology to give access to 1,000 more users in your company to the SAP data. Then if they only connect via SAP Gateway and via SAP Gateway for Microsoft, then they do not need a full SAP license. They can have a much more limited SAP license, which allows them, for example, not to use the SAP GUI. They would not be allowed to use that, but they can still use SharePoint, for example, to access the data via SAP Gateway. And there's a separate license for that on the SAP side, which is much cheaper than other SAP licenses.
And is Business One supported by this as well, or is it just
It's not explicitly supported, I would say, but Business One can also expose OData services. And once you have the OData service, then it's fairly straightforward. Then you can consume that also in SharePoint.
But you could license this SAP Gateway for Microsoft and theoretically on the back end tie it into.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, one more. So we do have some helper functions that are hosted in Azure, but then they're using OData to write the data back, really.
So that underlying
It's all OData
Yeah.
underlying. We just added some helpers on top just to make it easier to deal with the data.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Speaking of SharePoint, you have the workflow in SAP. Can SharePoint also support workflow? Once you have the gateway, can we have a workflow in SharePoint?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's for me really the powerful scenario that we have. We expose the workflow via this OData, and we can have it in Excel, in Outlook. You could have also, for example, a list of workflows in Excel, or you could have the workflow in SharePoint and allow your users to work on the workflow from within SharePoint. Absolutely.
Yes.
At the same token, you have exposed the data into the quick project and Excel. SharePoint also have a Excel data services. Can it also expose the data in there?
You could also
You
have
could
it in
use
the
SharePoint
Excel.
as well.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But the SharePoint can consume the old data source as well. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.